Hello and welcome back to another 100 Days video with me, Mr. Beardstone, and we're back here in our Skybees world to see how we get on for another 100 days. We had a lot of fun in the first video with the first 100 days building up many hexagons, not octagons, we did correct ourselves on that one. If you haven't seen the first 100 days video, I do highly recommend you check that out so you can see how we managed to build up all of this stuff and all the things that definitely didn't go wrong. Nope, nothing went wrong, it was absolutely fine. But now we have indeed returned for another 100 days. But first things first, it's been about 6 weeks since I made that video, and I kind of need to remind myself what's going on. So as the sun goes down, I think I'm just going to go watch that video myself. You should do the same. Day 1 on our new floating block in the sky. Right, well, I'm all caught up. I know roughly where I am, and I hope you do too. However, I did make a slight error in that when I was doing that, I completely forgot to pause or log out of the game, and we've been standing here for a grand total of 14 days. So if we look at our F3 screen, it does actually say it's day 114 now. But obviously we're going to start from day 101, otherwise this whole series is just not going to make sense. We'll ignore the fact that that is completely wrong. My bad. On day 101, we spent a few minutes reacquainting ourselves with the area and having a look through our quest book, and I decided I was going to try and upgrade the apiaries and get the bees producing a little bit better because the centrifuges just weren't keeping up. In order to do this, I was going to need a nether star, so for that I was going to need a wither bee, and after doing a little bit of research, I found the path I needed to take. So to get a wither bee, I was going to need to breed a wither skeleton bee and a soul sand bee. To get a soul sand bee, I was going to need a sand bee and a netherrack bee, but I didn't have one of those either. So to get a netherrack bee, I would need cobblestone and redstone, and to get redstone, I would need dust and sieve. So I started breeding the dust and sieve bees. The very first bee that came out was a cute little purple bee, and this turned out to be a Fluix bee. I had no idea what it is, what it does, or what it's for, so I did a little bit more research and discovered I needed to make some Fluix seeds to make a Fluix crystal, which would then enable the bee to actually create Fluix for me, which I still had no idea what it did. To create the Fluix block, I was going to need Fluix crystals, and for those I would need Fluix seeds, so I made some of those out of some bits I had laying around, and then I was just supposed to throw them in water, which seemed a little bit odd. I did it anyway. Nothing seemed to happen, so while I was waiting, I decided fishing would be a great idea. I quickly discovered what magnet does. Realising I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, I did quickly check the wiki for the Fluix seed, and I did indeed just need to throw it into water, and over time it would gradually turn into a crystal and it wouldn't despawn, so I made a different puddle so that I wouldn't pull them out with my magnet rod, and then just spent a bit of time fishing because I was still after some name tags. I had 2 bees I needed to name. As the sun rose on day 102, we had still not caught any fish, we checked our seeds, and they were still seeds, but they weren't clumping up, which means they were doing something. We spent the rest of the day breeding up the bees, and we ended with a couple of redstone bees, which is exactly what we were after to progress down towards getting a wither bee, and we also expanded the area where we were growing the Fluix seeds, because they were taking forever. We then went and did the usual thing of just spending the night fishing. On day 103, the redstone bees were finally big enough to be able to start breeding them, and I got my first netherrack bee. I then noticed, however, that most of the bees that seemed to be attaching to flowers were not attaching to the ones inside their little cases that I'd made them, so I started to free them, I opened them all up, and then I made a terrible mistake. Once I'd safely made it outside, I just watched them, and they slowly calmed down. I was hoping that this would fix the problem of bees not producing any honeycomb when they couldn't actually access the right flower. It didn't seem to matter if I used the honey dipper or not, I couldn't connect them to the right place, so setting them free and letting them do what they wanted just seemed to be the best option, because it didn't matter what hive they went into, everything was going to be collected and put into a centrifuge, so I just left them to it. And then, of course, I returned to fishing. Halfway through the night, I also decided to go check on my Fluix seeds, and the very first one I chucked in about 2 days ago was at 10%. So basically by day 120, maybe I'll actually be able to get some stuff out of the bees. Spent day 104 disorganising all of my bees, and I pretty much did the same thing on day 105, just making a few adjustments to the apiary so that the bees could get in and out of their hives better, because they really weren't liking those flowers that were trapped inside the small boxes. Overnight on day 105, it occurred to me I had lots and lots of levels, so I put them to very good use, and spent most of them upgrading my rod. I still only caught fish that night. On day 106 we managed to get 2 soul sand bees, and we were that much closer to getting our wither skeleton and wither bees, and it turns out we could also get ghast bees from these little fellas, so that was going to be handy. I then spent the rest of the day sorting out the bees, because this system really wasn't working. It didn't seem to make a difference whether I used the honey dipper or not, they just kept reconnecting to random hives. So I really needed to speed up this advancement with the apiaries and hope that that would help solve the problem. Later on that day we once again checked on our fluic seeds, and they were not even at 20% yet, so we had a dance party, purely because we hadn't had one in a while. On days 107 to 109, I carried on working with the bees. I was trying to basically work my way towards getting the wither bee, and finally on day 110 we got one. And then we realised we needed a block of nether stars in order to actually get more nether stars from it, so we were back to square one. After a bit of research, it appeared my only option was actually to fight some withers, but I needed a safe way to do that. I knew of the existence of a wither-proof block from making the wither skeleton bees, and I figured that would be a good thing to make the cage out of, so we can at least try not to explode our entire base while we collect the initial 9 nether stars. But once we've got those, we won't have to fight any more withers. Day 111, I was doing everything I possibly could to get as much obsidian as possible, so I made myself an obsidian bee, I got my lava production running so I could get some from the water technique as well, and I discovered that if I use the pure daisies and surrounded them with blaze mesh, I could also turn that into obsidian. Turns out I had loads of blaze rods, so that was going to be an easy fix to my problem. My wither skeleton bees had also been working hard, so by the time night fell, I was able to grab some extra skulls, and I crafted myself 5 witherproof blocks. I kind of figured I might want a few more than that. That didn't feel like enough. That meant I was going to need to cook up some more steel and make some more of the steel casings as well, and gather more obsidian. I kept the process going all night, gathering everything I needed, and by the end of day 112, I was finally ready to build a wither cage. I didn't, however, have any idea how to do this, so I was just going to wing it and hope for the best. On day 113, we braved the nether. We went back in there, we built ourselves a nice platform and put down some crying obsidian as well. We then built what we thought would work as a wither cage. Turns out it did not. With the wither on the loose in the nether, there was only one thing for it. We would have to go end raiding and get ourselves an elytra. There's no way we would be able to fight that wither on such a tiny platform without some kind of a backup. So I kitted myself out, I got everything I needed, I grabbed some food, I grabbed some arrows, and then I went on my way to the end. Oh, I also took some blocks with me, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to bridge anywhere. Once we were ready, we took a nibble on the old end cake and jumped straight through. When we went through the end gateway, however, we found ourselves directly in front of a city, and I was quite impressed, if not a little confused as to what was going on, but it did look quite cool. The best news was, however, there was a boat right there, so we basically just pillared up, grabbed the elytra, killed the shulkers on board, and then promptly made an escape, because we didn't bring any rockets with us. We'd come back and raid the city properly another day. As we arrived home, the sun was just coming up on day 14, and we realised we were definitely going to need to make some rockets, so we set to work on that, and got ready to go fight the wither in the nether. Although we had our wings before we went to take on the wither on day 114, we decided to do a bit of fishing to partly get some levels and partly think about how we were actually going to do this, because currently our wings did not have unbreaking on them. Halfway through doing that, however, I realised I'd actually be better off in the end, because I could just look at some endermen, kill them, and get the XP directly that way. That would get me leveled up quite quickly, and then I could use the enchanting table to put Unbreaking 3 on my elytra. I'd then be in a much better position to fight the wither. We returned from the end with enough levels to get an Unbreaking 3 elytra, and we also got something called multi-jump on it, which turns out is really, really fun. We then went back into the nether and tried to fight the wither. We put up quite a good fight, the battle raged on for quite a while, he took on some piggos as well at one point, but let's just ignore that. And eventually, he just kind of drifted off into the void, and then the void killed him. So it kind of solved our wither problem. However, it didn't solve the problem of what actually went wrong. So I decided just to go make lots more wither cage blocks things and basically just try and contain him a little bit better next time. When we came back from the nether, however, the sun was going down. We were very, very exhausted. It had been an interesting couple of days to say the least, and we basically just chilled out and then went to bed. For the next few days, I realised I was going to need to get some more wither-proof blocks, so that's what we focused on. It was going to take quite a while, however, because our still production was really throttling what we needed, so I created myself a few still bees and upped the production of that. It was still taking a while, however, so I built a great big fishing lake, in the hope that maybe I could improve my chances of actually getting a name tag if we had a bigger lake. The second cast of my rod into this lake did in fact give me a name tag, so we could finally name Bertie the first bee. I was very happy, and this was a great day. By day 120, we had enough wither-proof blocks to actually try and trap a wither again. So we went to the nether, we built a better cage, we trapped a wither, and he escaped again. I then tried a few different methods of trapping the wither. Nope. No. How does he keep escaping? And eventually I realised that if I didn't actually hit the wither and I just left him, he would eventually suffocate to death. It was just quite slow though. Approximately 5 minutes later, we had our very first nether star. Now we just had to do this 8 more times. So I doubled up on the fun to speed up the process. It still took a couple of days, however, but by day 123, we had the 9 nether stars we needed, and I managed to make the nether star block and get the nether star production on the way. A short while later, we had 2 brand shiny new nether stars, and I converted these into apiaries, and then promptly realised I had no idea how these worked or what I was supposed to do with them, so I spent the rest of the day reading 50 Shades of Bees, trying to figure out what to do. A short while later, I had a rough idea, and the first thing I was going to need to do was to expand out my platforms. So that's exactly what I did. I got a new platform built on day 124, and then on day 125 I built my first 2 apiaries. It appeared that they were all set up and working. I just need to now pick which bees I wanted to put in there and ensure they had the right flowers. On day 126 we grabbed a second name tag we had got overnight and we named another bee, which we called D-Man, and then we set to populate the apiaries. So first up I wanted to do the ones that just settled on normal flowers, and I put all the bees in there. It turns out I put way too many bees in there, so I ended up having to remove most of them, and I just put 1 of each bee in there, which was actually producing a lot of honeycomb anyway, and then I had to manually connect them to all the flowers. By this time it was day 126, but we'd actually managed to get both of the apiaries completely full, which told me I needed to get more apiaries. We also had a couple of barrels full of all of the excess bees, 1 or 2 of which still required a new home. So we were going to need to build ourselves more apiaries. Before that, however, we also needed to upgrade our storage for the honeycomb because they were actually filling up very quickly, and I hadn't actually built a centralized storage area yet, which I decided there and then was something we were definitely going to have to work on once we had the apiaries up and running. So on day 127, we set about building 2 more apiaries. This meant that we would be able to get everything we possibly needed into a new home. By the time night fell, I realised I didn't actually have enough glass to finish the builds, so I made sure I had all of the sand honeycomb going around so I could get more sand, so I could then cook that up into glass, and I also went and checked on my fluix seeds. They were now at about 90%, which was very good, but they were still not quite ready to add into the apiary, but I would soon be producing fluix, whatever that did. I then just spent the rest of the night fishing while I waited for the sand and glass until the sun came up on day 128. We spent the day building up the last of the apiaries, and then we messed around with the bees for a while. So one thing we did have to do was to separate all the bees that fed on flowers because they were all just ganging up on one flower, so we moved those. We spent the next couple of days just sorting out the bees, trying to optimize what they were up to, and then we checked the storage on one of the earlier hives we had, and it was already almost full. So at that point I realized I really needed to sort out a better centrifuge. On doing a bit of research, it appeared we were going to need lots of netherite in order to make a much more advanced centrifuge. But in order to do that, we were going to need a netherite bee. So we spent the next couple of days doing some bee breeding, which did result in a few additional bees as well as the netherite one we were after. Day 137, I went to go check on my fluix crystals, and they were actually ready. So I made myself my fluix block, and I put the fluix bee in there. I still have absolutely no idea what fluix did at this point. Then decided that before starting on the centrifuge, I was probably best off focusing on my storage because these things were filling up very, very quick with honeycomb. To start that off, I figured I was probably best off looking into the power mod, because that would generate better electricity for me, and then I could power everything I would need to, such as the storage, the centrifuge, and so on. And after looking through the book, it looked fairly straightforward with the things that I needed. I worked my way through the quests, and then I had to decide what I was actually going to use to create my power. I settled on solar panels. On day 137, I had managed to get myself some solar panels and an energizing orb and an energizing rod, and these things would help me to create the casing I needed for the centrifuge, but this was also a new form of power. I then decided to experiment with a few different power options and stuck some more rods down, and we ended up getting our first centrifuge casing, and it looked pretty awesome when it was making more, I have to say. On day 138, I made myself a backpack, and then I went to town taking down the old apiary. This was a bigger job than I thought, even with vein mining, and it actually took me well into day 39 as well, after working all through the night. Halfway through day 140, I had finally finished clearing the platform, I'd got rid of all the old centrifuge bits and bobs, and I had sorted out everything I could lay my hands on. To take the new power project to the next level, I decided I was going to try and make a reactor. Now, the highest level reactor I could probably get away with making at this stage was a hardened reactor, which looked like a level 3 one, so I got to work energizing some steel, which I enjoyed a whole lot more than I probably should have done, but it looked so cool. The next day we built our reactor. Well, I say we built our reactor, we placed a block and it built itself, it was like magic. I then had a look in the panel and I had absolutely no idea what any of that was. I had some uranite on me though, so I chucked it in the reactor and it seemed to be creating some energy, which was good news, I guess. I looked at the manual again and there was a page 2, which pretty much explained everything I needed. So I loaded up the reactor with some coal, some redstone, some ice, and I put a sink on top to supply it with water. This should keep it cool while it was generating power, and it was generating power very, very, very quickly. Now that I had a scary looking cube of power, the next step was to try and build a storage system. It was time to head back to the books. I had a look at what I needed in order to get my storage started, and the main thing that I figured out was that I was going to need quite a lot of steel, and that's something that we were still struggling with. We had plenty of steel honeycomb, but we had just changed all of our bee storage and we didn't have any centrifuges set up at the moment. So I decided to set up something temporary to store the honeycomb and also allow me to run things through the centrifuge when I would need it, until we eventually get to a point where we can do this automatically. By the end of day 143, we had made a right mess upstairs, but downstairs we had actually sorted out all of the honeycomb we were currently producing, but we did actually have more bees than that, just not enough places to put them where they weren't clashing with the flowers. I'd also managed to get a centrifuge system set up. It's fairly basic, but it'll do for now, and until we get the full centrifuge system up and running, that's going to be producing our steel for us, which we're going to need to actually make the automated system. We did, of course, also need a lot of steel in order to get our metal press up and running, which is the first step towards getting storage. So on day 143, that's what we focused on. The next day, I got the metal press up and running, kinda. I had to power it, and I had to power it with something called IF, and I wasn't too sure how to do that. I also still had to put the actual plate on it as well, so I delved a bit deeper into immersive engineering. I got my workbench out and I made the plate, but I still wasn't sure how to actually power the thing. I'm ashamed to admit it took another entire day for me to figure out the power situation. Turns out I just had to put the cable into the side instead of into the top. But now this thing was pumping out the steel plates like nobody's business. On day 146, I needed to make some quartz-enriched iron, so I went to the alloy machine thing and I put everything I needed in there and got them pretty quickly. I then went to go craft the machine casing, but it turned out I needed a completely different crafting table. So I went back to the alloy kiln, I threw in some iron and some black dye, I got some black iron and I turned those into plates and got everything required to make the crafting table so I could finally craft the machine casing. I unlocked all the quests and I was ready to go on storage, but it had started raining, so I just went to bed. Spent the next few days working my way through the quest lines in order to get my storage up and running. It turned out I had to get myself an inscriber, a charger, a disk drive, and all sorts of crazy machinery. By this stage I was lost, confused, and felt like I'd gone down about 10 different rabbit holes, so I referred back to my quest book and decided to take things a little bit slower and maybe not jump ahead to the storage. Oh, thank you for the tea, Mrs. B. On day 150, I realised that the route I really needed to take was Astral Sorcery. I basically needed to get myself a blood altar, because without that I couldn't make the steel casings and other things I would need. So I was going to spend a few days working on this questing table. However, disaster struck. Rather than watch my entire base burn down, I quickly put out the fires as best I could and decided I should probably move my lava generator. For now though, I was just going to cover it in buttons. I could deal with that another day. In order to progress on the Astral Sorcery path, I was going to need a lot of marble, so I promptly got myself a marble bee running and started generating that via the centrifuge. That evening, I grabbed my Astral Tome and I started doing some research. It looked like there was a lot to read again. Over the next few days, I dove deeply into the Astral Sorcery mod, and the aim of this was basically to get a blood altar, because I knew I was going to need that to get a specific type of steel in order to make my centrifuge, which was the long game, but I was actually just really enjoying the mod. It had lots of shiny colours, lots of cool sound effects, and it had a very, very descriptive book that had lots of cool graphics on it. The night after I'd got the fancy crafting table, I had actually forgotten to light up the platform, and it was covered in mobs. But I also knew that I was going to need some demonic flares, so I took that time to make a snare, and I just did battle. We now had a backpack full of demon wheels, and I didn't really know what they were for, but I do recall seeing them at some point, so I just stashed them away for now. Come on, please. Please get all the way there. Please get all the way there. It's been days. Oh, come on. Yes! Ah, finally. I don't even know what day it is anymore. And according to this, it's day 170, so I need to take 14 off of that. That is day 156. 6 days that took me. I placed the altar, cut myself to get blood, and then I made my first rune. The next day I had enough blank runes to convert my blood altar into a tier 2, and after much sacrifice, I finally got my steel casing. I then spent the rest of the day trying to remember why it was I made it in the first place. I had no joy there. On day 158 and 159, apparently I wasn't recording, but by the evening of day 159, I had noticed that. I'd built a great big centrifuge, hooked it up to the apiary, and I'd also got it powered. Storage was definitely an issue, however. Spent the next several days building up an area so I could finally focus on the storage. I decided I was going to combine 4 of the hexagons and make a big building around it, so for that I needed concrete, so I got that on the go, and then I just spent a while sorting out the storage drawers for what the centrifuge was producing. By the time I had this done, I had another few pure fluix crystals, and this meant that I could finally make my controller. I got that down, I got a crafting grid put on top, and then I got a disk drive that I didn't actually have anything I could put in as a disk, but that was something to work on in future. By this stage, although the storage was working, we were auto-processing things from the bees, it was a mess. That evening, I did some research into how to get disk drives, and the very next day, I started on the cleanup. The first thing to do was to move my reactor, so I got that pushed back against the back wall, I wired everything up, and I also then remade the metal press, the inscriber, and basically just rebuilt all of the contraptions I had dumped in the middle of the floor beforehand. On day 172, however, it was time to make a start on the disk drive, so the first step was to build a fluid extractor, which was quite funky. The next day I built a latex processing unit and piped all of the liquid latex into it so we could get rubber balls. I would need these to turn into plastic for the disk drives. And then on day 174, I made the dissolution chamber. I didn't really understand what that was, but it was something I needed. With honey pumping into the chamber, we were ready to start making our disk drives. I literally spent many days making processors. I managed to get myself a couple of 4K storage drives, and then I spent day 178 to day 180 moving my storage. I mean, literally, that's all I did for 3 days. I just moved everything from there into the disk drives, occasionally having to make some more disk drives just to make them better. On day 181, I automated my reactor, so what I needed to do was to pipe everything from my storage that I would need directly into the reactor so that it wouldn't die and make my storage inaccessible. I managed to get it automatically importing coal, ice, and redstone, and the last thing to do was to get the uranite. My current supply was only raw uranite, so I needed to pump this into a furnace, then back out again, and then I could pump it into the reactor. And now we were fully automated. On day 182, I had a nice relaxing start to the day. I went and spent some time with the bees, I labelled up the rest of the apiaries, and realised I only had space for one more bee, so I was going to need to consider expanding this area fairly soon. I then checked on my storage drives and realised I was almost full already, so I then spent the rest of the day making a 64K storage drive. This took quite a while and took me well into the next day. Once this was done, I spent the rest of day 183 moving my kilns and smelters and all those bits and bobs inside the new kind of building. It still didn't have a roof. I then started work on a wireless crafting grid. By the morning of day 184, I had my wireless crafting grid, but it had no charge. So I went over to the charger that I made on a quest line earlier and I couldn't put it in. I then did a search in the JEI and found another charger, so I built myself one of those, which for that I would also need some pink slime to put in the dissolution chamber, so there may have been some incidents with the friendly mobs. But once we had the pink slime, we made the charger and then we put our wireless charging device in it. It once again did nothing. By day 185, I had finally figured out how to charge it, and it needed a completely different system altogether. I then had to put in an ID card, and it would actually wirelessly charge my wireless charging grid, so I never had to worry about putting it somewhere and putting it down or anything. I could just keep it on me at all times. But the problem was it only had an 8-block range from my crafting grid, which was basically pointless. So I crafted some range upgrades and we managed to get that to the maximum, which was 48 blocks. Wasn't the best, but it was better than nothing. Now that storage was sorted, it was time to start making things look nice. We decided on a colour palette of grey concrete and some honeycomb, and then I decided to actually put a pool around the crafting grid, fill it with honey, and that looked pretty cool. We continued the floor replacement onto the next day, getting rid of all this grass. We were making lots of concrete, lots more honeycomb blocks, and by day 188 we'd replaced the entire floor. However, we needed light. I decided glowstone would fit best with the honey blocks, and by adding a few of those, we should now be mob free. On day 189, I built a really cool laser because it was about time I upgraded the centrifuge. There was such a thing as an elite centrifuge, and for that I needed lots more casings and some netherite. So the first step was to zap some steel, and by the end of the day, we had all we needed to build. Overnight, we got it hooked up to our storage network, and then we had to add some stack and speed upgrades to the extraction system because this thing was so fast. On day 190, it was finally time to move our honeycomb storage. This had been outside for many days, and now we moved it inside. We hooked it up to the centrifuge so it could continually take what it needed, and we hooked it up to the main storage so we could access the honeycomb to make blocks as we required. We also discovered the elite centrifuge can do blocks, so we made lots and lots of sand honeycomb and put those in because we were going to need lots of sand over the next few days. We then went and removed the old centrifuge, cleaned up the area, and now it was time to start thinking about a roof and expanding my new building upwards. On day 192, all of our new sand came in handy as we made and placed lots of white concrete. On day 193, we did exactly the same, and by day 194, we had the lower roof covered with dirt, which would soon be grass, and then we trapped a zombie villager who seemed to be roaming around the base. He might come in handy. I realised that the end was approaching. We only had a few days left, so it was about time I got D-Man and Bertie the first bee out of their jars and into a shiny new home. So that's exactly what we did. We also added a few colourful bees just for effect, and we definitely had no trouble getting all the bees in there. On day 198, the centrifuge had stopped working, and I discovered that ender honeycomb doesn't seem to go through it for whatever reason, so I moved it off of the honeycomb wall to prevent it clogging the automation in future, and then I made lots of sand and gravel honeycomb blocks to boost the supply of white concrete. We were going to need more. The next day I spammed honey blocks and built a walkway to nowhere in the rain. I really needed to get that roof done, but I was running out of time and the concrete was not being produced fast enough. By the evening, however, I did have a little bit, so I placed lots of white concrete overnight and decided to finally complete the ex nihilo page in the quest book by making some netherite meshes for my sieve. We got the great big satisfying advancement sound, and I was very happy. I then went back to place more white concrete on the roof, but it turns out we had made a mob farm, so I just left. On the last day, we had a little bit of a look around our base, and then we went to go check on our passive mobs, as they were looking a bit light. We then promptly witnessed the extinction of all llamas. On the plus side, we now had lots of pink slime. I then looked guiltily at the one remaining cow, wished him luck, and then went back to placing more concrete. Alas, as the evening arrived, I had not completed the roof. We just didn't have enough white concrete, but it was starting to come together nicely. I guess completion of this building would have to wait, for I was out of time. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching this 200 days video. I hope you have thoroughly enjoyed it. They take a lot of work to make, and I'm seriously considering doing a 300 days one because this mod is absolutely fantastic, and to be honest, I really enjoy making the videos, I'm not gonna lie. If you do wish to see another one, please let me know in the comments, and if you can correct any of my many derps I've been making here and help me simplify the process of things, please also let me know in the comments. This is really difficult and I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. As always, if you have enjoyed the video, please do remember to like and do consider subscribing if it's your first time here, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye now.